Man, the only big wrinkle that I have with horror through the internet is I can't control the lighting in their rooms, which is
Well,
really
yeah,
frustrating because lighting can do a whole lot.
it most definitely can. But here's the thing, and
Hmm.
one of the things that I've found with horror is that it's been culturally diluted to the point that things that normally that you would read up, like if you read Mary Shelley's Frankenstein today, you
Yeah.
don't get.
Well, of course not.
So it's whereas at the time it was like this is dreadful. This is stuff that would worry people,
So
and
I think that's a great place to start. Right out of the gate, you can't use vampires, werewolves, zombies, or any other thing ruined by pop culture. At least not as they are. I'm not sure you can use them at all because pop culture has has adapted. Zombies aren't just dying light; they can climb just as well as you can. We have video games where they adapt. We have movies where they mutate and they're terrifying. Like so since fear is ultimately the unknown, facing the unknown, there are things that are obviously fearful, like jumping off a 50-story building. But you know what's going to happen. You're not afraid. It's just a bad idea, and you know it. Like that's not really fear.
so that's a very important distinction to make. There's a distinction between horror. There's a
Hmm.
distinction between fear,
Hmm.
which is a different thing altogether. Which they sometimes go hand in hand, but they're not the same thing.
They're not the same thing.
They're definitely not. And there's also the distinction of terror. And I believe that lighting thing goes more into the whole terror thing. But we'll get into that in a moment. But here's the thing: how how do you determine what is going to work as a horror or terror inducing thing, or is it be where it be an encounter, or it be a plot line, or whatever it was,
Mm.
versus something that's going to be a little bit more tropey and like, okay, well, it's monster of the week, so there's really nothing different.
Well, I don't think you can. I think you just have to look at your players and figure out what's working. The good news is Dread takes forever to get going anyway, so you have lots of time. But as far as other elements of fear, I think you just look at them and see if they're spooked yet. If they're not, you have two choices. You can stick with this, or you can switch gears.
Well, here's the thing, and you bring up dread, which is a different thing altogether. So you'll
Mhm.
notice that in preparation for this thing, I looked up all the definitions for a whole bunch of words,
Oh, did
and
you?
dread is
Excellent.
something else entirely. Well, here's the thing: you bring up dread, which is
It definitely is. I'm busy linking the YouTube link for this because Andrew asked me to.
there we go.
You were saying, I'm listening. I'm just.
So here's the why don't you handle that one, because this is probably something that is going to be fruitful for the rest of the conversation.
Sure.
But to make sure that you know what you're talking about is one of the first things you have to go for, because then you actually can set up your own expectations as a game master. As okay, this is the thing that I'm going for. I'm not going for existential horror. Maybe I'm going for dread, or maybe I'm not going for dread. Maybe I'm going for intense fear. That sort of situation, and then you can cater it according to what emotion you want to elicit. And it also depends on your players. Some players can handle high octane fear one session after another, whereas some people just can't. They're like, okay, we had 5 minutes of this, that's all I can tolerate, we need to change gears because that's it for me. So it's also another thing. But what you can do is like, okay, they can't handle the active portion of fear for too long, but maybe they can handle dread for the 4 hours.
Right.
You know what I mean? So just to clarify for those things, that how I am using the terms today, which you can disagree with if that term means that, but just for the purposes of this conversation, the distinction I'm making is fear is the gut response that you get that makes you decide impulsively between running or fighting or otherwise. That is the sensation of like that
The thing that
response.
activates your fight or flight response.
Correct.
Right.
That is what I'm calling fear for the purposes of this conversation.
Yeah.
Whereas dread is the anticipation of a significant loss, as in, we're not going into the encounter yet. The encounter might be an hour down the road still, but I'm already feeling the loss of my character, or the resource, or like the magic item that I'm not going to get, or the plot is going to end, or otherwise. That is dread. It is the the negative sensation of anticipation of a loss, which is very different because you can drag dread out for a long time, and you can have, you know, a very kind of Halloween centric, if you want to do it even that way, session that is 4 hours long, and the only real scary part is at the end, but you dragged out the dread the first 3 hours.
Oh yeah, I think a classic example of it is the first Alien movie. You don't see the alien
For sure.
until the end, basically.
For sure, because
And
you
terrifying.
know what's at stake to be lost. You know that if you lose, it is going to be painful, or it's going to be gruesome, or it's going to be something that you don't want to lose. But you're not even at the moment where you could lose it yet. You're just in the anticipated, like, whatever is going to come up, it is going to be this bad if it does happen. But I'm not even at the point yet.
Dread is
that's what we're calling. That's what
you let them do all the work, which is a lot of fun, because you cannot scare your players like they can scare themselves. No way.
Correct. Absolutely correct. And there's a whole bunch to be said for not correcting them, not even guiding them towards that. Towards, like, if that's what you think, that, you know what, don't just poker face it, like, yep, that's it. So that's another thing that you can go for. So you can go for the fear, because the fear is in the moment. I'm afraid to drop this 20-sided die, because if it rolls a 1, it's done. It's all over. That is fear. You fear the actual thing. Whereas dread is the anticipation for the end result.
Right.
And the other things that you can go for, which are cultivated very differently, are horror and terror.
And revulsion. We should cover revulsion.
Revulsion, you know what? Revulsion, I think, merits its own thing, because that is so much of a cultural thing. Because what is revolting to one, not even one person, one group of people, is completely pleasurable to another.
True.
So think of it like, for example, and this is one that I like to bring up when people bring up things that are gross or revolting or otherwise. I grew up in Mexico City, which means that I ate worms and bugs as a delicatessen at certain restaurants, and they were alive and squirming on your plate, and that was revolting to no one. It was like, oh, this is
that's
thing.
Weird to me. Not so much because it's a bug, but because I have to go get it, and I don't really want to do it.
Well, I mean, you get it off the menu. It's not like you actually went out.
Oh, I meant, but it's moving on the plate. Like I have to, like, yeah.
It has its it has its limitations. You don't, like, for example, the grasshoppers are no longer moving on the plate by the time they get to you.
Oh, okay.
Because they are charred before there. So even if one were still to be alive when that one got on your plate, its legs are burned off. So
it's not flitting away on you or anything.
It's not going on you. But if you ever go to the kitchen, or if you ever go to the to the taco stand where they're actually roasting them, you will see them jump around before you eat them.
Huh.
So, and here's the thing. To me, that is not revolting at all, because culturally, eating bugs and eating worms and otherwise is to what to many else is just like eating cows. Right. You know, if you talk to someone from India and say, this is dead cow you're going to eat, that is revolting. They're going to lose their minds.
Right.
That's right. Whereas for us, it's like, yeah, that's steak. Right. That's totally fine. So I think that revolting is such an it comes down also to the individual, obviously, but it comes down to where you are. If you describe a revolting scene of, a feast full of maggots, and you describe it poorly, then you can let them put in the revolting parts themselves. Whereas if you go into too much detail, you're just flavoring it, I guess.
Right.
And
right.
that might actually lose the
swap
effect.
out the word poorly, which suggests a lack of skill, for sparsely instead, because you're deliberately using your skill to describe less.
Correct.
Skillfully, I think there are some revolting bits. You're right. We should do this on a different one, but I think there are a couple of standbys you can use as revolting. Have you ever slipped in a slick of blood and fallen on your back? I imagine it doesn't matter who you are. That's gross.
So this is something that you might not know about me. I am a certified EMT.
I did not know that.
I am.
Have you
I have seen puddles of blood, and they're never pleasant. So you're going to get that jaded response from a lot of people in the EMT world or in the email. So it's like, oh no, I mean, that's just normal to me. It really never becomes normal. There's a point in which you kind of just have to say it's normal so that you won't concern people, and that you also kind of, it's a mental thing that you won't concern yourself, but
In
it
the
never
same way
really becomes
surgeons
normal.
can't afford to look at their patients like people because they can't afford to get emotionally attached. Right.
Correct, but it really never becomes normal. So when the times that I've had blood splatter or otherwise because of some situation,
Right.
my immediate concern is always, did it fall into somewhere I can absorb it? My mouth, my nose, my eyes, or
You're
any.
cut somewhere. Right.
But immediately after, I'm like, nope, mask on, the whole thing. The immediate next thing is like, oh, how am I going to wash this off?
It isn't you. That's gross.
It isn't that's gross, because there comes a point in which, if you are an adventurer,
Mhm.
you know that you're going to deal with death, guts, and blood.
That's true.
How you're going to deal with it is different.
I
But
think
once,
that's a very important aspect of both fear and revulsion. You mentioned earlier, some players, you do 5 minutes, some players you do 4 hours. Ah, I am not a big fan of horror for more than 2 hours at a whack. I don't care how durable your players are. The greatest horror epics in the whole world are like 2 hours long. There is zero because for me, fear is ultimately having to deal with the unknown. If you take out all the fancy labels and go all the way down, you can only be afraid of something you don't know. The alien is much less terrifying in the next movie because you know what it looks like, you know what it can do, and you knew what it could do before you saw it in the first movie. You saw a bunch of damage done to people and locations, but you didn't actually see it. So all those claw marks, dug through a man's chest and left a cavity this big, maybe the claws are actually this big. You don't actually know. Turns out it was its teeth for the most part. And while it has a whole bunch of them, they're only this long. That's not that different from your average big scary thing in Australia. So once you can see the alien, it's much less terrifying. Cthulhu, I think, should never ever have a mini, ever.
that's another thing.
Because
Theater of
he's
the
an
mind versus
abstract
grid.
creature, and as soon as you put him on the table, you're like, yeah, that's Cthulhu. Their brain is gonna. He's 2 inches high. Lame. Like, like don't do that. So I think you can only maintain horror for so long before you're fighting uphill. I'm not saying you can't maintain it for 4 hours, 8 hours, a month, but at a certain point, you're just swinging at empty air and hoping a ball happens to be there when you swing the bat, and it'll probably work. But 2 hours, I think it's better to leave your players going and then stop than to keep squeezing them for more tension.
For sure. Also, there's something very real, which is stimulus fatigue.
Yes.
There comes a point in which you are afraid for so long that your brain says, oh, so that hormone is just there. It's not a new sensation. That's just a baseline sensation from this point on.
Right.
It's no longer something.
Right. I had an argument with a friend about the Hulk the other day. They were like, "Well, nobody can beat the Hulk," and I said, "That's not true." And they went, "What?" I said, any guy who can run really fast, like any guy who can stay away from Hulk long enough and is a halfway decent shot, can kill the Hulk." And they went, "What?" I said, "Think about it. Hulk reacts to his fight or flight response. When Hulk gets upset, when Banner gets upset, he turns into Hulk. But with stimulus fatigue, in theory, if Hulk fought something long enough, he would essentially just not be angry anymore. That would be normal now. He would just be bored, basically. He'd power back down to Banner, shoot him in the head, fight's over. But no fight with the Hulk ever lasts that long because he's, the Hulk.
It's funny that you mentioned that particular example, because this has nothing to do with what we're talking about, but I think it's very relevant. There's a meme going around in social media that says 2020 is so weird that if a interdimensional portal opened up in my kitchen and a tentacled monster came out, all I would say is, well, now this is something I have to deal with.
You're right. Big world. Right.
Because again, and when you're playing a game that is so stimulating as is an RPG when well done, of course.
Right.
You are already in a mindset of accepting that weird shit is what it is.
It's like that, right. You already have the expectation that weirdness is going to happen.
Correct. Or that, like, oh, there are ghosts in this world, or there are that's what you were saying, vampires, zombies, skeletons, and otherwise. Because how many times have you run a encounter with zombies and skeletons and it was not a horror encounter? It was not a themed to be scary encounter. It was just the monster that you were fighting at the time.
Oh, me, not very much. I'm very much anti-monster in the book. But it is a cultural norm. Yeah, yeah. Zombies. And I find that a lot of the time, this is a subject for another day, custom monster creation on the fly, but often zombies and skeletons get lumped together in the same way that goblins and kobolds get lumped together. They're not the same. If you're treating them the same, you're not treating them correctly. If goblins don't scare your party, you're not trying hard enough.
And again, and you bring up another thing. So you can scare your party without having a horror themed day or having a horror themed
Oh yeah.
So again, so fear is one thing, but we're going for horror. So here's the question. How do you actually go from all right, I'm scared that I might lose this fight and my character may die, which is every time I roll dice.
Pretty much.
Versus this is scary in the sense that when I get up from the table, I'm gonna like, oh man, that was something that kind of drags on with me for a little. It's kind of, it lingers with you for a little while. How to transition that one? How to make that happen?
For me, the unknown. Put your players in a situation where they are the prey. The players are almost always the predator. They have more men, even if they don't have more firepower and more of them than there are the bad guys and more magical items or whatever. If they feel like they're in charge, from their point of view, they are. And you can see that when you go out and you meet people at your job. The guy who thinks he's king shit at Turd Mountain, it doesn't really matter if he isn't, does it? He really does believe he is. Like that. If your players feel like that, you cannot scare them. So you'll need to strip that out of them first. You can do this with overwhelming odds or firepower, but if you do that, the possibility of a battle becoming much longer than you actually want it to be is possible. Another option is to turn everything's hit points down, including your player, so you can talk to them first, and turn everything's damage up. I have great returns with that. Most fights at my table, even if they're a boss fight, like a giant dragon, 4 hits, we're done. That's it, move on. If your players get a critical hit, that's 2 hits, move on. Like, it's a dragon. On the trade-off, that dragon can kill them in 1 or 2 hits. The first time, so I'm playing ICRPG a lot right now, and you start the game with 1 heart, which is 10 hit points. You may, depending on the class you play, you may never have more than that. The first time something hits you for 8, you're scared now. Like the first time, because if it hits you again, you're dead. And now you know that if it had got a critical hit, you would be dead. Right? Boom, done. Because your player's brain is going to go there immediately. They're going to go, wait a second, he just rolled dice and he didn't say natural 20. Well, shit. That means this thing can just kill me. Like, so low hit points, high damage, if you're looking for just like shock value. But if you're looking for something creepier than that, I can't believe I'm going to say this. Buffy and Angel is a great example of that. Yeah. Hold, stay with me for a second.
No. I'm trying to follow because I don't.
Do you remember when Angel turned back into Angelus for a while in the Buffy show, not in the? Okay. You remember how fucking creepy he was? He would go out of his way to torture Buffy at any given moment, but he wasn't just going to like hurt her or whatever. He was going to target her friends, her family, and she has a bunch of those. So we'd make a big deal about, I'm going to torture Xander because he's your friend for no real reason. Beyond that, she'd go find Xander and he'd be off torturing Willow instead. He would make her dance around and inevitably fail to beat him anyway. Like all that energy expended, and then he would only actually do anything when she was tired and filled with dread. The day that Bane snapped Batman in half like a twig, he did it because he wore him out first. He ran him all over Gotham, beating up everybody else. And when he got home and he's exhausted and he's tired and he's in Wayne Manor where he feels safe, Bane burst through the door and snapped him in half like a 2x4. So if you want your Batman, absolutely let his guard down, because in his house, he isn't prey, but he's not a predator either. He's just Bruce Wayne. He never expected an attack there. That's the problem with one of the problems with fear. You have to be unexpected. And if your player's been playing for a long time, they absorb a lot of pop culture content. That's going to be really hard to do with things like zombies and skeletons. Use them anyway.
Which is more and more prevalent now. Even younger players are already
saturated with certain horror elements. Right.
That's true. Now, you bring up something a little bit interesting, which is kind of resource depletion.
Right.
So what I'm thinking, and this might be a way to approach it, is that if you actually have something that is supposed to be the horror-inducing either creature or encounter, because it might be a full encounter,
Right.
It should not be the opening scene.
No.
You have to run them through something that depletes them either as a player mentally, because it's a lot of puzzles to go through and they're literally mentally tired, or depletes their character as far as resources go, so that even if they wanted to, they no longer have that 9th level spell that could have just solved the encounter in one shot.
Right. Video games have done this for a long time. They give you the mini boss, tougher than your average enemy, usually has more hit points than he does damage, and you're going to fight him either right before, like the big bad guy's going to snatch into the room afterwards, or like one room, he's in it, empty room, maybe you can catch your breath, and then the next room. But that spare room is just to literally let you catch your breath. Your character's not going to get more, he's not going to get his healing potions back. You're not going to be able to.
There's not a cache of healing potions in that next room.
Right. There might be a save point in that room, but I've only ever seen that in games where your save point didn't give you all your shit back, like Final Fantasy 12. Where you touch a save point, you get all your mana back and everything. And usually when they do a mini boss, you can't go back. This is it. You're going to pick both of these fights back to back. Mortal Kombat calls those endurance rounds, and they are exactly that. It's not, can I win? Of course I can win. It's a Mortal Kombat game. They're easy. It's, can I win this many fights in a row with one hit bar? Because they're effectively mechanically overpowered now. What we're really talking about is a character with 2 hit bars and 2 different move sets split in half.
Sure.
Or 1 move set with 1 hit bar. It's how come I don't like multi-attack. I think multi-attack is mechanically overpowered far beyond things like Wish.
It really debatable, just simply because of the action economy there. But if you're not sticking to the action economy anyway, which seems to be your case, which you're not, then yeah, for sure it's overpowered. But it didn't in the mathematical constraints of if you're sticking to all of them, it's normally fine. But here's the thing. Now you mentioned it is, if you have a mini boss and a boss, it's effectively one big fight. Just 2 sets of moves.
Right. If you can't pause in the middle, it's basically one big fight. Right.
Well, I don't know if you picked up Mythic Odyssey of Theros for D&D, but
I will eventually.
It is very highly rated. It has some good things in it, Dungeon Master stuff. But one of the things that it introduces is monsters that effectively behave like video game bosses with different forms. If you go through this much, if you get them down to 0 hit points, they will change their stat block and get a new set of hit points, which is effectively like having 2 monsters, even though thematically it's the same. Now you've always had the chance as a DM to do that and to just say, oh, well, now that you did this, it does its Frieza thing and now it transforms into its ultimate form. And it does. I don't believe that would induce the sensation of fear or the sensation of horror that we're going for, simply because it's reliant on a game mechanic. And the thing that I've found is that the more there are game mechanics for something, the less emotional response you get for them. Because 5e, for example, has rules for sanity. It has a condition called fear.
Right.
But that is a mechanical thing that you have to say as a player, okay, if it gets this fear thing, it limits my options this way, or does otherwise. But it doesn't, as a player, which is what we're going for, induce the sensation of fear.
Agreed. I think this is for several reasons. Your players can buy that book and read it. And as soon as you let them look at, as soon as I say let them, I'm going to put this out. Never ever restrict your players' access to books. Don't be a jerk. Those books cost money. If they read a module you're about to run, they rob themselves of something new. It's not, you don't really have the right to tell them not to do that.
It's reading the spoilers before watching the movie. That's up to them.
Right. It's totally their call. Don't do that. Anyway, public service, in my opinion, out of the way. I think that if they can read about it, it's known at least a little. And it's also, like you said, it's not just known. It's not just a movie I've already seen. It's a game mechanic. They've detached a little bit from it. If I think you could get away with this isn't even my final form, final boss. If when that happened, its new form was a drastically new challenge. Like, I don't think they'd be afraid, maybe apprehensive. If they fight a giant minotaur that hits like a bus and is wicked slow, and then kill it, and poof, it just there's I don't know, it disintegrates into flakes like in the Avenger movies. And then 3, 2, 1, poof, somebody takes significantly less damage but gets poisoned and bled. There you go. Like it turns into something else that's invisible that has completely different techniques. You might be able to yank their chain once, but I don't think they're going to get afraid, and you can really only do that once.
That's more akin to a movie's jump scare.
Right, exactly. It's fear, I guess. Like,
I mean,
that's
yeah,
always
it
good, like
will.
shots, but
Well, now here's the thing, and one of the things that you mentioned was don't have Cthulhu as a mini because he's just
don't do that. If you're gonna run horror, do a theater of the mind.
and
Or
that's exactly what I was going for is in games that are so combat centric, for example, at Dungeons and Dragons, which is the default example that I normally use. So please bear in mind that. Since all the mechanics are about combat and most of them are assuming that you have a clear understanding of distance between your character and the monster or whatever it is, going kind of jarringly going from, hey, we've always been doing this on a grid, but for this session, we're going to do it all theater of the mind. How do you sell that to your players? Because they have to have a bit of buy-in, or else they're just going to, like any other person, they're just going to zone out like, well, I mean, my DM wants to do something different. I'll indulge him because he always indulges me, but I can't wait till next week when we're done with this theater of mind.
Right, but you don't really want to be here. Right. I think that's an important detail. Horror, and I think this is actually true of all things. I think horror needs it more, but I think you should have it all the time. Psychological buy-in. If your players, on various levels, if your players want to be there, they'll have more fun. Even if it's terrible, they'll have more fun than they would if it was terrible and they already didn't want to be there. Right. So there's really no reason not to get psychological buy-in from your players. And people who love horror movies go to horror movies on purpose. They want to be there. They want to feel the when the weird thing happens. They want that. So get that from them. Like a friend of mine, Scott, is a big horror movie buff. He's a huge movie buff for horror movies. He's seen more horror movies than like enough to fill my lifetime. I cannot, and he loves D&D, and I cannot possibly host a horror table for him. Because there's no way in hell that I can do something he hasn't already seen or done or played or experienced or thought of, because he's wicked smart.
Now, here's the thing about, and you bring up something that's completely off the topics that I was going to put out, but here's the thing. Yet they go in willingly. That doesn't mean they're not also willing to enjoy it.
True.
So, because everyone's seen action movies. Everyone's seen, every D&D player has seen some movie in which there is a big fight, in which there is magic, or in which there is some sort of, if not magic, it's the Force. If not, it doesn't matter. It's just
Willow, raid, right there. You've covered.
And still, they go in because what they want to do is they want to play through it and live through it vicariously through their characters. I don't think horror is any different in the sense that no matter if you've seen that plot line before, now you get to play and be in that plot line,
right?
Which I think is absolutely fine. But what my question more goes to the change of style. If you are normally someone who does bring minis, because I believe I read one of your posts that one of the things that you bring is the ultimate dungeon terrain plus a couple of minis. So there is some physical representation of the monsters' characters. And from that to some, you know what, this time it's completely different. We're going to go all theater of the mind because we're going for horror.
Here's how
that's the change. That like, how do you sell them on that?
I don't have that change. So my ultimate dungeon terrain is a big ass disc. It's like, I don't know, covers most of the table. I'll go get it if you want. I'm real proud of it. But
I'm assuming you made it yourself.
No, I made one, but a friend of mine also made me one that is substantially better. So I use that one. Also more portable, lighter. Like she's amazing. I don't understand how come she doesn't quit her job and just make those. There's absolutely a market for it. Anyway, so the minis that I bring are trees and crates and signs and scatter terrain, doors, quarter walls, that sort of thing. Because full length walls, if your players are in a room with full length walls, they got to put their greasy mitts over the thing, and it's annoying. And don't do that. Love your players. Sure. Get quarter walls. Don't be an ass like that. So I don't actually use monster minis ever. Like ever. Okay. Why would I? Even if it's a thing that I need to be unknown, then I cannot use a mini. And if it's a thing that I expect to be known, they already know what it looks like in their brain. Every player
Right,
in the
but
world knows
wouldn't
what
you need a mini just for the positioning on how close, far, or otherwise?
nah, abstract movement. Nah. Like, so my Ultimate Dungeons and Dragons has
Okay.
3 zones on it, if you want to call it that. It's a disc, and there's a ring on the outer edge that's probably wide enough to hold 2 minis, one against the edge of the board and one against that mini and kind of facing the center of the ring, like a bullseye, but only has 3 rings on it. Most of the ring is the middle, most of the disc is the middle, the middle of the circle, not the middle of the. So you've got 3
Sure,
rings.
I got you.
And the core of it, the bullseye, is probably large enough to meet it for, if I would actually set up minis on it, a room and an average size room and a half, or 1 large room. If your players are in the middle of the space, that's where the core of the action is. If they're adjacent to that, but like, say they're fighting inside a lab, anyone right outside the lab on the other side of the wall is in the middle space. Anyone far enough away that they can't really fire arrows or spells or whatever is on the outer edge. That's it. On your movement turn, you can move zone to zone. If you're in a space where there's a bad guy, shoot him. If you have a ranged attack, you can, and you're in the middle space, you can shoot either one. That's it.
Fair enough.
That's all there is to it.
Now that is a different set of just combat rules and otherwise, and every system will be different. That's absolutely fine. D&D uses a different system for that. It's just graded or otherwise.
Grid-based
It's absolutely fine.
I decided when I was 8 that I hated doing this and counting the tiles. I hate it. Anyway, no offense if you love that.
Now here's the thing. I'm assuming that for this whole horror thing, you're going to switch over to probably not even propping that up or not even putting that down. Or how are you going to how are we going to handle the letting their imagination run wilder than normal so that they can kind of psych themselves out?
If I'm going to have a situation in which so usually I don't. That's as descriptive as I'm going to get. There's going to be a lamppost, maybe there's going to be a crate, that sort of thing. But if I want them to be completely disconnected, you have a fog roller or whatever, and you take those things away. If you're busy walking through the mists of Ravenloft like an idiot, then there's no scatter terrain. You can't see anything. But if you do this, if you bear all the way down, they're not the characters in the movie. They're never the characters in the movie. They're players playing the characters in the movie. And that line is useful to step over sometimes, depending on who your players are. But it's also very important to remember that it's there. So if you frustrate your players too much, it's not actually fun. Frustration is the other end of fun. True fear is not fun. Because as long as they're afraid and they know it's going to end and they remember that it's just a game, you're good. But if you get psychological bleed, which does happen to the finest of actors, not just people you happen to know, method acting is deliberate psychological bleed, and sometimes it goes too far. Heath Ledger comes to mind, who was an amazing actor and absolutely killed himself because the Joker got control of it. That's dangerous. Heath Ledger has a copious amount of acting training and it killed him. That's scary. So you have to be careful with psychological bleed. In theory, you just shouldn't play with people who can't control that. That sounds easy. On the other hand, that makes it all their fault, and you might not know whether or not you can control it until somebody really grabs a hold of your psychology like that.
Hence the importance for buy-in, because they have to know what they're getting themselves into for starters. Yeah, for sure. I absolutely agree.
If there's going to be some sort of, if for some reason you really, really want to take away your player's sense of location, then pick all the scatter minis up off the table. The shit, don't even use a table. If you're not going to use any minis, then you don't need a table. Not one with squares on it anyway. I suppose you need something to roll dice, but that's an argument.
Well, and that actually brings up to another thing. So how willing are we to change the game mechanics on them, just so that we can actually continue that sensation of unknown or otherwise? Because the moment, I don't know about you, the moment you hear the dice drop, like, even if it's not you the one who's rolling, it's like, Right. It's a game. I mean, I can still
Get a
win
mouse
this.
pad.
Dice could roll in my favor. It's not as bad as it sounds.
Seriously, get a mouse pad. Done.
Also, so
Mouse
definitely
pads absorb
do
all
something
sound of
do
dice.
something to do something to literally muffle the sound.
You can either what did my friend call it? Curate the probability, which is to say
Fudge the dice.
or just I mean, if you're gonna fudge them, why roll them? Just tell them what happens. But if you're opposed to that for whatever reason, and you feel the need to roll dice in spite of the fact that you're deliberately weaving a tale of fear that could absolutely go south if they succeed a bunch of times in a row. Anyway, if you must roll dice during a fear encounter, mouse pad or some other cushy thing that will absorb all the sound. I find mouse pads work really well for that, and they're small and they're portable, and if they get wet, it doesn't really matter, you know.
Oh yeah, no, you can just buy another one, and that's pretty much done with that one. Now, there's the reverse of that, which is that also dice rolling is part of the things that induce fear in a player when it's not them who are doing the rolling, if one's the DM.
But only if they know you're rolling.
That's right.
Know you're rolling
In
dice,
which case, it does have to sound like, okay, dice are being rolled, something is happening, this could get worse.
right. I in the past I've rolled dice behind a screen just to and roll them, go just to make them uncomfortable. Those die rolls meant absolutely nothing, and I did it just to wind them up. Like, and that worked surprisingly well, as long as every now and again something bad happens. The good news is you don't even have to plan that. They will overreach themselves eventually.
Sure.
Just, go just whatever sound you make when you do the I'm gonna screw you guys die roll, make that sound when they overextend themselves. They will think that was your plan the whole time. You'll look both like a jerk and like a genius. Like, and it was totally them.
True. And a lot of that is performance on the DM side,
Right.
but which is exactly the role that you have as a game master. For this thing. You have to put on a show, so to speak.
Right.
Now, here's the thing then. How are we handling then the ambience and otherwise? Because I don't know about you, but in online gaming, I find that it's very easy for players to detach themselves from the game, to even just pull up while someone else's turn is going. They just turn away from the camera, pull up their phone or anything like that. Right. So that's a bit hard. But most of the time, I'm going to say that if you're going to go for an intense kind of involved experience, part of it's going to be in person. The intent is for it to be people who can actually see each other, hear each other in person, live, and otherwise, and kind of get that in there.
So my slipper just flew off of me. There must be
no
guys in the room. I don't know what that was. All this talk of horror, attracts the.
For sure, yeah. No, the Ouija board starts to move on its own even before you touch it. Sure.
Right. So I think you're right. Ambience is a huge deal. Arkham Asylum is a fantastic Batman game. It's brilliant. Arkham City is bigger and has more options and makes you feel more like Batman. Arkham Knight is even better than that, but has a fairly predictable plot, which is to say it's boring as crap. And if you've read a Batman comic for 15 years, you already know what the ending is. But the rest of it is awesome. The Batmobile is stupid cool, and his abilities are ridiculous. And you're never going to be bored because there's a million different ways to get the goons to fight each other, let alone make you do it. It's brilliant. But Arkham Asylum is the best horror Batman game because of the ambience. Batman, so in City and Night, you are loose on Gotham City. In Arkham Asylum, you're not loose. You're stuck on the island. Now, in theory, I'm sure Batman has a bat boat tucked somewhere. And the reason you're stuck on Arkham in the asylum on the island is because that's where the game takes place. But in the story, you're stuck there because Batman wants to fix it. He can't help it. He's Batman. So if you want your players to go run off into this terrifying, scary, unknown, we might die. What the hell? What was that? And then they turn around, there's nobody there. Hey, look, there's a footprint on the wall. We're gonna go look for that. Oh, they disappeared when we got close. That's creepy, right? If you're gonna throw them into a situation that they expect to make them uncomfortable and maybe risk their lives, they need to have a reason to risk their lives, so they just wouldn't go. Like, they just wouldn't do it. Like, so an emotional connection is a great reason. Batman is compelled to try and beat up thugs. Spider-Man's guilt will drive him to any risk.
Now, you bring up something a little bit interesting, which is a dodgy subject that some people will say is going to fall into player agency, and it's the motivations of the character. So, in the example you bring up, Arkham Asylum, which I agree is a great game, the game designers need to constrain the game because that's just how they have to build it, and it has to happen. You can't say you can't play as Batman and then Batman say like, you know what, maybe I don't care enough and just go home. But if you tell the players how their character feels, I do believe that there's a valid reason to do so, and it can be done tactfully. But some will argue then you're playing for them because you're just telling them what their character would do, and you're just having them roll the dice. You're just playing with yourself, which is
so for me, that's a delicate one. There's an immediate red flag when as soon as you said tell the players how they feel, my skin went because I'm not a fan. Instead, I would suggest that you help them, should get them in on it. Help ask them whenever I have a phase zero later on today at 3 o'clock, we're gonna run a Marvel table. So excited. I'm a huge Marvel comic. Whoa! Anyway, and I'm asking all of them questions. I don't care what superpowers you have. They ultimately they don't matter. That's not who you are. That's what you can do. You can also give a shit and be afraid. And what makes somebody who they are is things like, who do you love? Who are you afraid of? What makes you really, really angry? Superman loses all common sense when he engages in battle with Darkseid, all of it. He'll stop moving innocents out of the way in order to hit him. He sees red and he's completely gone. I've watched the rest of the Justice League have to try and pry him off of him because the planet's going to explode and they need to go right now. And Superman, they're not even sure Superman will survive the blast. And he doesn't care. I'm not even sure he's healing them. He's just hitting that guy again. That's weird, but a noticeable character because it's Superman and he's usually head of reason even in total strife. But that's interesting. And the writers know that and they never ever shy away from that. Superman would never willingly work with Darkseid. Never. He'd willingly work with Lex Luthor if it came right down to it. He's not going to trust him, right? But he'll work.
Which is different.
Is different. But I'm pretty sure that he would never actually sign up on a project with Darkseid. He can't. He would just beat him into the ground as soon as he was in sight. Superman doesn't normally do kill on sight, but with Darkseid, that's where he is. So you ask your players who their rivals are. Do they have any loved ones? Hopefully the answer is yes, because that's really useful. Everybody kills their parents for some reason. I'm an orphan. I don't know my parents. Don't do that. Have living parents, at least one. Better yet, have one that you really, really love, like you're a daddy's boy, and you and your mom hate each other, right? Like do something creative like that. So once
that's exactly the situation of my last character, who was a sorcerer, but we'll get into that.
Once you have those things, you can basically guarantee that if they're playing the character, that they'll go risk their lives. If, like, I love my wife more than I love the concept of being alive. So if she was in a burning building, I would go attempt to save her. And I am most certainly going to die, probably. And I'm going to risk it anyway. And so you can tell your players how they feel, but you can tell them how their characters feel, but you can also build a world and a web of a social network with them. And if you have the buy-in that you're talking about, and you should, they'll do it. You won't have to tell them how they feel. They'll go do the stupid thing because
here's the thing. The reason I'm mentioning telling them how they feel is think of it like when you're reading something that's a book about existential dread. So think of it, maybe Lovecraft would be a good example, in which the bulk of the story is, you know what, even better, Poe's The Pendulum.
Yep. Okay.
The bulk of the text, the book is mostly describing how the person feels,
right?
And much less describing what he's doing.
Right.
It does go into squirming the squirming movement and that sort of thing, but it's more like when you're doing the narrative portion of that story, it's all about, we don't know why he's in that pit with the pendulum. And we don't really care because the whole point is how the dread that he's feeling, and that, for example, is dread. He knows exactly what's going to happen. The whole thing.
Right.
So I'm thinking that when you're doing a horror themed session or a whole adventure, which would be really weird.
I'm doing one of those on Sunday. I'm very nervous to run it's a grimdark campaign setting, which is not strictly speaking a horror campaign setting.
At least not every session is horror. That's right. It will touch on those. But here's the thing: you're going to spend the time that you, as a GM, describe the surroundings. This is what you find on the ground. This is what's around. This is how these things look. I believe it has to turn a bit more introspective to the character. Like, okay, and your character, as he walks in, he feels uneasy, and memories of his, and insert backstory here, come to mind, and he feels the same childish fear that he did when he first walked into others. So you're much less describing the world, you're much more describing the internal part of the character. However, the more you dip into that, even though you're not telling the player what to do with that information, it is normally in the hands of the player to describe how the character feels. So I don't know how much you're allowed, well, not allowed, you can do anything you want, how much it's useful to cross that line as a GM and say, I'm going to start talking about how your character feels instead of letting you talk about how your character feels. So, to the point in which I'm not trying to railroad you and like you have no choice but to act on this fear or to act on this memory, but I can't pull back enough that I can't mention it, because otherwise I'm not explaining why this is so fear-inducing.
So I think ultimately you can't. You just, I think I think there's a very, very firm, crisp line between telling you how you feel and telling you what you do. You are your players' senses. They only see, hear, smell, taste, and what's the other one? Touch. Mm-hmm. What you explain to them. They choose whether or not to pick up their sword, in which case they touch it, sure. But there was only a sword for them to touch because you said there was. There was only a world for them to see because you made it. So in the host is many things: the physics of the world, the world itself. But a lot of the time, what you are is the descriptions. You are the engine, the senses of your players that they see the world in. So it is absolutely within your right to tell them how they feel, because that's a sensation. I don't think you have the right, unless they give it to you, to tell them what they do. And in theory, if you have the buy-in, say you got 4 players and you have the buy-in with 3.5 of them, and the one you have, like, you kind of have the buy-in but not really, you tell him that he's terrified and he wants to get away from this bad guy with everything he's got, and he rushes and he attacks him anyway. Don't say you can't do that. Roll with it. You can't tell him he can't. And then the other players, he'll damage their experience, probably. If he does, you have grounds to talk to him about it. If he doesn't, if they're still having a great time, I guess it's not a problem.
It's not that it's a problem or otherwise. They can still do whatever they want. It is, in the end, an open-ended situation, unlike any video game.
Right.
But what I mean is that how much is it okay for you to kind of take over their character in that sense? Because you're right, you're not telling them what to do. But for example, I had 2 interesting experiences that you might hear this.
Okay.
You might find this one interesting. So I'm running a group on Thursdays, and one of the things that they missed an encounter because they went literally to the east, and the adventure assumes that they will go to the west, and they will bump into to some sphinxes who will kind of give them a quest that they really shouldn't refuse because it lines up with their goals for the main quest. Fantastic. But if they don't take that side quest, let's say it that way, they lose a big resource that does count against their initial quest. So but they went the other way. They were like, you know what, we're just not going to follow that little thread. We're going to go to what we think is correct, and we're going to go to these. So what I did is I improvised, and I said, okay, well, you see some what seems to be lions with wings flying over, and then once they get more or less atop you, they fly back into the horizon. And you see that all day as you travel. And they decide to shoot him down because they thought it was a manticore. Turns out it was a sphinx. And so Manticore via Sphinx. I don't know if you've read because I do play by the monster manual.
Right, those are distinctly different creatures, right?
Completely different, and a Sphinx could have obliterated this group. Just one Sphinx could have just squashed all these 4th level characters. So it comes down, and the first thing it does is like, who shot the arrow at my wife? And then swipes at someone. And I had not read the stat blocks for the Sphinx. So I just rolled it. Okay, 2d10s plus 3. Boom. Well, he is 2 hit points away from dying from one swat from the Sphinx.
Right.
And then the Sphinx has a roar, which gives the fear effect for anyone who doesn't roll their save.
Right.
Well, here's the thing. The characters that rolled their save could attack the creature. The characters that didn't roll their save were fearful and couldn't do that. That's just the game mechanic. They couldn't get close. Right. Well, the 2 characters that actually failed their saves were the only ones who were looking for ways to attack the thing. And all the characters that made their saves, their players were the ones who were like, nope, we are not getting close anyway. We have actual genuine fear as a player. Whereas the 2 players that actually fell into the game mechanic, since it was a game mechanic, they fought against it. They're like, well, I'm going to find a way around this game mechanic. I'm going to attack this thing. It's going to, you know what I mean?
Right.
So that's one of those situations in which I didn't have to tell. When I told them, your character feels afraid, that's why he can't get close, hence the game mechanic. Whereas the other ones that I didn't tell them how their character felt because they made their save.
Right.
Those were the ones that were actually afraid.
And I think that's a hard one. So you can absolutely tell them how they feel, and some of the time, this comes down to, again, player agreement and buy-in. If I'm running Rissus, here's a better one. Ryutama, I am running this next Thursday. I am super excited. Ryutama does not have conditions for things. It has conditions, but there aren't a whole lot of them. So if you have things like, let's see here, your only status effects in the entire game: injury, poison, sickness, exhaustion, muddled, shock. And all those do is subtract 1 or more dice from 1 or more stats. So essentially makes your die roll smaller. So in Ryutama, if it says you have a 4 strength, that means you roll a d4. If you have an 8 strength, it means you roll a d8, that sort of thing. And you can lower down to 4. So there's no fear mechanic in that book at all. That doesn't mean your players can't be afraid.
Right.
If you tell your players if they rolled on the thing and they got injured, you're supposed to role play that out. You fell and broke your ankle. Okay. You didn't just tell them how they feel. You told them how they work. You just told them about a physical harm. There is not a huge difference between, I just told you your character's dead because you ran out of hit points. I told you your character can't move because he's tied to a post. And I told you your character can't attack that guy because he's afraid. Those are all game mechanics. If we don't actually have dice for it, and I say, you feel a deep-seated sense of dread, and you're not really sure why. One, you've told, not shown. Don't do that. That's bad storytelling. But you can. But in my experience, players push back when you do that. You get the immediate ego. Well, no, I'm not. Right, and they're not, or they wouldn't be able to say that, because if they were really feeling dread, they might not have heard you. They'd be too busy drowning in their own blah 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 blah. So I think whether or not where the line is between those things is up to you and your group. And if you have the buy, you can get along with a lot more. I don't think there's a hard line for anything. I think there's my perfect table. We don't have a book. We don't have dice. We don't have character sheets. We don't have any of that stuff. You don't need any of that stuff. But for my friend Valis, you do. You absolutely need dice. And you need a rule book that's 400 pages, and 399 and a half of them are rules. And he's not wrong. He just wants something different than I do.
For sure.
If you're going to find, if the question is, at what point do I run out of right in order to tell my players how their characters are, what their experience is right now, ask them. They'll tell you where the line is. And if you cross it at some point, be prepared for them to, in the moment or after the session, be like, hey, I kind of thought you overstepped. Okay, where? Right? And don't get all judgy, just ask them. If they bothered to bring it up, I'm sure they have a moment. Like, I'm sure there's a bit where you cross the line and they felt you walk over it.
True, absolutely. And that's a good thing for any sort of situation, whether it be horror or otherwise. If the player brings it up, it matters to them. It's something that's going to affect how comfortable they are playing with you in the future. So yeah, absolutely don't ignore, for sure. Whether that be horror or whether that be, hey, I don't like that you mentioned my character's father because I had a different idea of what my character's father was, and you kind of trampled over my backstory there.
Right.
Whatever it is, whatever it is. If they bring it up, it means it matters to them. So now, if it matters to them, that means that you had their buy-in. That means that you did well before that to make sure that they were in there. So just don't squander the good faith that they put, that sort of thing. So absolutely good advice, no matter what sort of session you're running. Fantastic stuff. Now, we kind of went out of ambiance and we kind of sidetracked, as we usually do. And one thing that I was gonna ask is how ham-handed is too ham-handed for our ambience, and how much is just too light and it's just not enough.
So for me, two of the biggest things for ambiance is lighting, which is almost impossible to control in
remotely. Sure.
Right. It's almost impossible to control remote. I guess you could ask them to affect the lights in their space, but at that point, I think you're swinging too wide, and they may not have the ability to do that. They might be playing in a common space. They might be watching TV with their kids in the next room.
Exactly right. That's exactly what I was going to say. If you're not in the same space, they actually still have to be aware of who's with them.
Right. They simply may not have the capacity to turn the lights down. Right. And I don't care how much dread you've got going on. If somebody's playing the Surge game in the other room, and there's a bunch of cussing and swearing because that game's kind of hard,
sure,
it's ruined. Like you can't get that.
No, or if if you're playing with someone who is either babysitting or they're a parent, and baby cries in the other room, like, oh, sorry, gotta go. This is whatever dread was in there. Like, what? I got some.
And pacing and dread are inextricably bound. So dread happens over time. Essentially, the fear that something is bad is going to happen at some point from who knows what. You don't even need to know that something's bad is going to happen. You just need to believe it. Once you have that, you have dread. And dread works better when you've experienced it for a while, and then the terror release at the end. Even if you win that fight, like the Alien movie, that's dread, fear explosion, and we live, which is exciting. Well, most of us.
The protagonist gets away.
Right. Really, most of us die, but the protagonist gets away. That was, I guess, a positive result, but she was terrified the whole time.
Right.
If you pause that movie while you watch it, you ruined it. Hitchcock's Psycho, same deal.
Very different types of
very different. Very different. If you watch that movie in a straight shot in the dark in a movie theater, it's pretty creepy. I loved it. But if you pause it every 10 minutes because you have a cell phone today and you didn't when that movie came out,
sure,
it's not going to bother you at all, because Psycho preys on dread. It needs it in order to function. And if you keep pausing it, you ruin it. Once you have your players in, you cannot have a phone ring. You can't have the TV come on. You can't have one of their wives go, hey, I need you to help me with this. You can't have their boyfriend be like, hey, the hell is this shit all over the bed? You can't have any of that. Once you have that, all your immersion is just shattered, and you can get it back, maybe, but probably not. And they won't fall right back in. That's I don't like to roll initiative, because that's the only time that you're deliberately asking your players to step out of the immersion for a moment and then deliberately step back in.
Which again can still be done with sufficient buy-in, but yeah.
Right. And it's weird for me. So for horror, I love horror for the same reason I don't like initiative, because they're both dependent on immersion.
Now you mentioned that pacing and pausing, but here's the truth of the matter of most tabletop role-playing games is whenever you stop for combat, you are literally pausing the story.
You absolutely are.
So you are breaking up the pacing.
You absolutely
because you have to fight something.
So save it for the end. Have no fight. Just one at the end. Or something fluffy in the beginning, like You are playing a Call of Cthulhu title, and you're cops, and you engage with thugs, and I mean the guys with guns, but you have body armor and better guns, and in theory better aim. To be fair, in theory better guns, and you beat those guys. And then because you one of them looks like the gang leader who's on America's Top 10, you go look. You check the bodies. One, you got to make sure they're dead or not, right? And two, you go, hey, look, I think this guy, I think it's we're gonna be heroes at the station, right? We got the guy.
Yeah.
And as you dig through his pockets to make sure ID and all that, you find a demonic insignia, and we just step right into the supernatural, right? And you follow, which your players were expecting because it's a Call of Cthulhu campaign. And then you
Correct.
go down the rabbit hole with that, and then say the session's going to be 4 hours. For the next 3 hours, there is no fight, none. It's exploration and communication and discovery. That's it. And then at the end of the session, maybe you have another fight. Preferably, what you would do is you would find the room that has the fight in it, describe just enough of it to make their eyes turn into dinner plates, and then say, "I'll see you next week." Like that's how I do Dread. I give it to you at the start, and then I don't see you for 7 days.
Okay.
I let you just
So,
sit on it.
so what you're actually doing is you're letting the players kind of simmer on it between sessions, so
Yeah.
that they come into the one already like this is going to be the fight, but you already had all the experience of the fear and the terror as the week went by, or whatever distance there is between sessions. That sort of thing. I never thought about that, but you're absolutely right. You can actually let that be the pacing for it.
Yeah.
And in that case, you are kind of spreading it out because they're not going to be thinking about that all the time, but they'll think about that on their spare time.
Right. The first time I did, what was it? The branch born series of plant-based enemies. I've got some of that on YouTube. Shameless plug. And one of my players, he's brand new. I've never played with him before. This is our first campaign ever. We get to the end. They end up underground. They dealt with mind-altering drugs, a rose bush the size of a warehouse that tosses spears and appears to be fireproof. They encounter a church. They end up in the ground. There's a giant metal city underground, and there's a tunnel. And they go through they take like 50 steps down the tunnel, and there were 2 green eyeballs the size of doors. And I said, I'll see you next week. And they all assumed I was kidding, and I killed the Zoom call. Because if I have to go, no, I'm not kidding. If I have to say all that, I'm ruining part of the Dread already, and I can't have that. So I just killed it. And
Nice.
got back to them the following day and said, hey, I didn't have a power outage or anything.
That was the end of it.
That was the end. I'll see you in a week. Like, in case you were wondering, right? Because abruptly I killed that off. No, I'll see you guys next week. I hope you had a great time. And Mike got to hold me and goes, dude, I didn't sleep right. That's not okay. But he had a blast. Because I don't care how long you're going to play. You can be one of those guys who plays for 14 hours with his friends, and you bring coffee and soda and whatever. You are not playing for a week, right? Your individual session cannot be longer than however many hours a week is. There's no way in hell. So if you're going to play weekly, let that away time. They're going to think about the game anyway if they had a good time. Sure. You might as well put a little dread in there. And no matter what that fight is, it can be terrifying, it can be incredibly lame. It will be more terrifying than you could have made it by yourself, because they've been psyching themselves out all week.
That's true as well. So and again, that's
the giant green eyes was just a mole. It was just a very big mole.
Or it could have been it could not even be a fight. Like, well,
it could have just been like a spooky maze going, ooh, go away, ooh. It could have been anything, right?
Yeah, no, I totally get that. That's absolutely correct. But it's one of those things that you don't need to plan for it, right. But you do need to make sure that it falls towards the end of the session, because you need to build it up. But also, and for most of us for most of the people who might be listening to this, we are interested in being a paid dungeon master, a paid game master. You cannot say half an hour into it, well, we got to that point, see you next week. That's so also the timing of those things and the pacing of, so it's another thing to think about. How do you make sure that you may not have had enough encounters to have your clients at this point then say, yep, I felt a little bit of dread there, but I paid for 4 hours of dread, not half an hour.
Right. So for me, I can't believe I'm saying that. I'm gonna sound like such a weirdo. So I never ever roll on random tables, ever. But they're still my favorite books to buy because you pick those up and you flip through them and you go, because whoever makes a book of random tables usually gives a huge fuck. So those tables are massive, and you take just lines off them, add them together, and come up with weird encounters. Anyway, just have a bunch of freeform encounters to plug into your thing. If they polish, like I ran a Cyberpunk one shot for money, right? That was a professional one shot. It was a 4-hour window. They finished everything in 3 hours that I had planned, which was not very much, to be honest, because I don't plan a great deal. Shut up for 5 minutes. Seriously, they'll talk. They'll tell you what they want to do next, even if they don't mean to. If they say, "Wow, that fight was really intense," and they say it with, "Wow, that fight was really intense," not, "Ugh, man, that fight was really intense." If they're still, there's a difference there. That second one is, "I'm tired." That first one was, "Man, I wish it was longer." So you have, if that's what they said, have something big and scary smash through the wall and fire cannons at them or something. If they're exhausted, give them a social encounter. We had both because of how much content they had left. They had so the big fight in that was a giant warehouse-sized cybernetic T-Rex. They destroyed it without actually fighting it, which was very cool. It was very cool and very slick. But it does, the length of time that combat counter should have taken literally didn't occur, and that's a big fight. So I don't know if you played Cyberpunk. It is incredibly lethal. Most things don't have tons of hit points. They just do lots of damage. And armor will help you soak damage, but when it's gone, it's gone, and you're a fleshy thing with no armor. You can't play like a Minotaur or something in Cyberpunk. You're just a person. It's like Shadowrun without any of the fantasy. So you just,
I've not, and again, I have to apologize. I'm not as literate in
oh no. Have you played? Not at all. Everybody likes what they like. I just like all things.
No. And keep in mind that for most people, and this is no diss on you, quite the contrary. We most of us actually are, in a good way, kind of envious of you. Is that most of us don't live off of this. So we have a budget that we have to dedicate to this, which is not our working budget. I have a certain amount of money that I pour into things that produce money for me, which is the most of my budget, and then I have a small budget or small
a lump left over,
for things that just give me joy, which is so. For anyone who is listening, please do not, if there is any sort of tabletop RPG you haven't heard about or something you're not following along, don't take that the wrong way. Quite the contrary, we all understand that for starters, time is limited, 24 hours in the day. You can't read everything anyway. But also, we are talking about becoming or making this something that gives you revenue. So it is worth that if something that you hear interests you, dig into that. Maybe that might be your next purchase. And find that if you can find a way to enjoy that sort of thing, or otherwise, it's definitely worth your while. But do not feel bad that you cannot follow every example. No one is expected, other than the speaker that we have, Mr. Baloo over here, to actually know every tabletop RPG on the.
Oh, I don't know them all. I certainly don't. Next on my list is Quest and Kids on Bikes.
I've heard about Quest. Quest has really good reviews. I actually have it on my to purchase list. But well,
really cool. I'm not exactly sure why I'm fascinated with Kids on Bikes, because it's basically Goonies the tabletop, and I'm going to make a bunch of enemies right now. I don't like that movie. I'm glad somebody
even more. I've never watched it. So
I'm glad somebody did. Last time I said that, somebody said somebody. The 80s liked it. Okay, you're not wrong. I just don't care.
I gotta say, I drooled through the 80s. It was when I was very young.
I drooled through the 80s. That's great.
I don't think that.
Yeah, I was born in '88. I missed the majority of the 80s and a majority of the early 90s because I was a little kid. Right.
Yeah. No, exactly right. So you can't. And again, and that's another thing for anyone watching. Do not feel bad that you do not know everything. You are not supposed to know everything. But also, the more you do know, the more you can draw from. Now, I'm gonna bring up a controversial tabletop RPG that is the first RPG that I fell in love with and never played. And I bought the books. I put a lot of money into it, but I never played because
Okay.
I never had the audacity to bring it up to my friends, I guess.
Are you about to say
And
fourth
this
edition?
was, oh, sorry, what?
Are you about to say fourth edition?
No, no, no. Fourth edition, I
Really?
would have loved to play.
Okay.
It has good mechanics. No, different thing altogether. The New World of Darkness, not the original World of
Oh,
Darkness
nice.
by
Okay.
White Wolf,
Yeah, yeah.
but New World of Darkness, which was supposed to fix all the mechanical stuff from World of Darkness, which I don't know if they had a problem because I never played it.
They did bunches. So many
But
bunches.
but in its premise, it was a horror game.
Yeah.
Because even though the first expansion or module they had out was vampire, the base core book is you're a dingy human.
Yeah.
And then you can add on the vampire on top of that if you get bitten, or you can add on the werewolf otherwise. But you start out as a human and you have all of these limitations. And the whole thing, the book, the cover, the artwork, it was all meant to be scary.
So at
Which
some
I
point,
found,
we want to be part of an NWAD or a New World of Darkness campaign. I would be happy to do that. And I do not normally say that because I'm not a huge fan of the system. But upon further introspection, I just figured this out a couple of weeks ago. It's not that I'm not a fan of the system. It's that I'm not a fan of the idea of players playing monsters. So if you want to play a human, great. I will sign up for that in a heartbeat.
you know what? I would take you up on that offer because that is exactly the type of game I wanted to play.
I am absolutely turned off by the idea of players playing. You want to play bad guy? That's fine. You want to play Lex Luthor, Joker, Carnage, and that guy's evil. That guy is just gross and nasty and vile.
That is chaotic evil in its definition.
But for me, there's a line between playing somebody like that and playing a literal monster like a vampire, particularly the way they're presented in White Wolf. So if you pick up the newest version, Vampire 5th, there's a big block of text in the front of the book that says, hey, you have supernatural powers and a humanity score. But don't make any mistakes. You are a predatory threat of the night. You are a monster. You will eventually lose that humanity. You will fork over your character sheet to your GM if you don't die before that. You are the bad guy. And there's really nothing you can do about it. not really. You can't.
It's the theme of the game, what you're signing up for.
Right,
for sure.
Exactly. You can't gain enough humanity to not be a vampire anymore.
Right.
It's not like Angel where you get a soul and you're basically a person now with supernatural powers and some impressive weaknesses. It's not like that. You are a threat. And I really don't love that. And I'll do it because I don't host for me, so if they want that, I'll do it. But it's for a long time, I thought it was that I didn't like vampire, that I didn't like White Wolf, but that's not true because the werewolf one, the old werewolf one, I loved it because you're not monsters. I mean, you are, but you're inherently, in theory, a lot of the old werewolf clans were inherently heroic. That was the deal. Here are special powers because one of the three beings that make up reality has gone a little nuts and it's going to lay waste to all the things. So we need champions to fight it. Guess
correct.
What? You.
That is correct.
What you
different
have,
premise from different
right. The premise is different.
Yeah.
The reason I hovered on this for a second was because I've read a lot of books and I've watched a lot of content and I play a lot of video games because I like to play video games, but I also play a lot of video games because I look at them and go, I could use something from that for the table. I read a lot of tabletop books. I absorb as much story as I can, but I don't know anything. Not really. There's so much to know. Like there's and whenever I look at a thing I've been chewing on, my whole life and come to a new realization, I'm just reminded how much I really don't know in the grand scheme of things.
For sure. You definitely should look into it. The game mechanics are actually relatively simple for New World of Darkness.
Yeah, I like them.
It's just D10s. That's it.
Right. I miss the old World of Darkness because it had Soak. And Soak sounds cool.
I have no idea what that is.
Okay, so in Old World of Darkness, fights took forever. God, they took forever. Because if you hit somebody, first you rolled damage, and then they had a soak number that would just absorb a certain percentage of it. They would just eat it. If you did 4 points of damage and they had 5 soak, you can't hurt them. Not until you roll 6 points of damage. So and then they're going to take 1 point, maybe, because then they get a dodge check. Right? Like what this meant was that fights could take a really, really long time. And White Wolf isn't really designed for combat. It's not particularly good at it.
Not at all.
It doesn't
Actually,
want
even New World of Darkness is not really designed for combat.
Right, because that's not the point. That's why they call it the storytelling system. Now, granted, that's like judging a stealth game for its fighting mechanics. If you're fighting a lot, you're probably doing it wrong, right? You're fighting uphill and you really shouldn't be. But I think I miss NWAD because it tried really hard to have this cool mechanic that just did not work. Like it didn't work at all. But for actual, and it sounds cooler than it actually is. But playing it, yeah, I'll take the new one anytime.
I have to make a quick pause because you guys don't know this. My dear loving wife is not home right now.
Oh.
And if she's calling me, that means she needs a moment. Give me one quick second.
You bet.
All right, sorry about that.
No worries. Is everything okay?
And this is one of those things that can definitely ruin the horror. Like, hey, wait, I have a call from my spouse that I cannot ignore.
Right.
It's not one of those like you can call back later.
Right.
So picking up where we kind of left off is there are games that are meant to be scary, that they're meant to go for horror or terror, that sort of thing. Right. And they're more meant to be that way, sometimes because of their mechanics and sometimes because of their plot. Now, plot-wise, you can always dump any plot into any tabletop.
What you want.
That's nothing like that. But how about special mechanics that you have not previously introduced just for that session in which you want to cause this sensation of fear? Now, one of the things that I want to kind of bring up on that one is that, okay, if you have to control the pacing, and this is kind of why I was bringing this up, that means that you can't pause for combat encounters.
Not really.
Because you will kill the pacing. So how would you, is there any mechanic that you would bring in to say like, okay, I wasn't planning on you fighting that guard, or I wasn't planning on you fighting this whole thing, because that's not the way that I thought, the idea was that you would work around it and find the clue or otherwise, but you decided to fight him. And that's going to break up the whole suspension, the whole, well, not suspension disbelief, but the whole suspense. Is it, how okay are we with saying, normally we would fight, but you know what, roll me this die to see what happened, or how can we change the mechanics without jarringly telling our players we're doing something else? And that in and of itself breaks the immersion. And kind of finesse those so that you don't lose the pacing if they decided to go into a combat that you did not plan for.
So for me, that boils down to role playing out what happened. No guard, you're probably not just going to say there's a guard. If you did, you actually have more flexibility here, though you offered less description, which is not necessarily bad. There's totally thing is too much description, and the wrong description. If it doesn't matter that the puddle is brown, nobody cares. Say there's a puddle. Actually, if there's a puddle and the puddle doesn't matter, and the puddle is there because it's raining, tell them it's raining and move on. Right? You can absolutely focus on the wrong thing. If they're engaging with a guard, and you describe this guard as big, hulking, and imposing, and they pick a fight with him, he's dumb, right? Use some detail that that you didn't offer up, because nothing's true until you say it
That's right.
at the table. So offer some detail that you did not offer up before to let them role play that out real fast. You're not going to roll dice. You're going to say, upon second inspection, he looks like he's half drunk. What do you do to him? Move on.
Okay, so
there's a guard
so-
and he looks sharp as a tack, right? He's keen-eyed and paying attention. And now maybe they want to make a stealth roll, or they actually, in this example, they were attacking him, so they attack him. Turns out that's his big thing. He was a mishire because he's kind of flimsy, and you guys thump him with no effort. You just jump him. Describe that to me. You're done.
Okay. So instead of introducing a different mechanic, you're just going like, you know what? Go into role play. Go into the narrative portion of it and bring that part up.
But this one's important for lots of players, and players usually want to feel like their choices have weight. If dropping that guard doesn't change anything, their choice didn't have any weight. If you have players who care about that every time they make a call, then something has to happen because they dropped that guard. And for me, the quantum ogre is not acceptable. If there was a left door and a right door, and there's an ogre behind one of these doors, and they go through the left door, and you had originally had the ogre behind this one, you don't just move him. That's not okay. Don't do that. Mostly because it's dishonest. If your players find out, that trust you have is gone, and you may never get it back, and you have no right to ask for it back. Don't do that. Instead, don't plan what's behind the door until your players do a thing, and then be like, okay, well,
which is fine too.
He's a guard. He falls over and smashes into one of the windows, and it doesn't shatter into pieces, but he does crack it with his head. Easier access thing. Or less noisy, because if your players go like Rambo on this guy, well, I mean, the other end of making sure their choices matter is to give them the weight they deserve. If your players if they shoot him with a shotgun, stealth's over, right? Have that guy crash the window and shatter it into a billion pieces. If they right with a blackjack to the back of the head, well, they cared about maintaining their quietness, so they find keys in his pocket that open a door. Like give them something so that their choice has weight, no matter what choice they made, even if it's absolutely the wrong one. Like even if it's absolutely the wrong call.
Now, one thing that I do kind of always stress is that there is no really wrong choice. It's just a choice you didn't expect them to take.
Right.
And that,
I don't know.
What is wrong is that you can always finesse it in such a way that choice turns out to be the thing they needed to progress the plot. Maybe not the literal avenue that they were taking, as in the street or the corridor, but the plot will still be the right choice to advance the plot.
Right.
That is so.
In the Uncharted games, which are big, sweeping set piece stories, you never end up on the wrong island. You know, like he goes to find crypts that have been long buried and no one's seen them for thousands of years, maybe longer. And he finds them on the first shot and has everything he needs to solve the puzzle, no matter how ridiculous that puzzle is. Like, no matter how obtuse and squirrely it is, you can solve it. And the answer you might get is, well, yeah, because it's a game. Yeah, but it's a game designed for your enjoyment. So in that way, video games and the table are very similar. The whole point is for you to have fun. That's how come I heard somebody tell me once, they said no one actually likes exploring, they like discovering. There's 30 empty hallways and they go down all of them and they find nothing. They might not go down the 31st empty hallway. So you need to give them something to be worth it. It's a JRPG mentality. If there's a left and a right, and I'm pretty sure the quest is over here, I'm going over here first.
Right, because I want all the content.
And if every single time I go over here, there's nothing, I'm actually playing an action game and I'm going to be disappointed and I'm going to stop doing that. I'm just going to go towards the doodad. You don't have to put something in every hallway, but it doesn't have to be loot or treasure either. You can, the first time you have your players march into a goblin den, rather the first time your players march into a goblin den, don't make them march into a goblin den. Or put somebody they love, have someone they love be kidnapped by the goblins because the goblins think they're their next savior or something like that. Like the goblins aren't going to hurt them, but you're not going to get them back. right? Like something like that. The first time they walk into a room and you describe it as dank and covered in brown material, and the smell is of the worst bathroom you've ever smelled in your life, it's a goblin stink pit. That room is empty technically. There's no loot, there's no enemies. Technically it's an empty room. But you still flavor texted the world, so it's not a hollow room. And hollow rooms for me serve no purpose. No one has just an empty room in their house that serves absolutely no purpose at all and is designed to serve no purpose. If you have an empty room in your house, it's because you're not using it, not because it was there just to take up space.
Correct. Correct. So, and that was actually one of the things I was going to ask you is that, all right, so if the quest was to the right and they went to the left, and of course, that's because they maybe misread the puzzle and the solution was
Because
the other way
they let a
around.
Dragon Quest to right.
It could have been. So if you're not going to give them something, a reward for like a treasure or otherwise, how do you still have them, what do you put in other than flavor text, I guess, to make it worth their while to still have gone down there? I mean, especially if what you want to do is cultivate a kind of sensation of, again, you want to make it scary.
Right.
So what is it that you put in there? Is like, okay, I'm going to reward you with more scary, even though I'm not rewarding you with more treasure.
Right. So I personally get kind of like, I was playing Dying Light earlier. It's the only zombie game in the world that I like and I love it. And I don't know why I love it so much. I'm skulking through this school and there's a sense of dread in there. So there's probably going to be zombies in here and I kick the crap out of those things now. I got a bunch of cool weapons and upgrades and peace game. But I also know, because right before I went in, there was a cutscene where Rise, who's a local warlord, he's got a bunch of armed men, armored guns, like assault rifle guns, the whole bit. And in the school, they don't have to worry about shooting those things because they're not going to attract a bunch of walkers from outside because of how the game's engine works.
Okay.
In here, all the zombies that are in here are all the zombies that are going to be in here. When you're outside, if you make a bunch of noise, the game spawns more of them and they chase you. In the beginning of the game, you can just wave a gun in front of Rice's men and they'll be like, ooh, right? Like, hey, don't do anything rash. In the school, that's not going to happen. And I know it. And it's just me in a small space because Dying Light is a free running game. You do a lot of rooftops and jumping from this to that and hurling yourself off a 50-foot cliff and do 1,000 trash bags. Like there's a lot of open. And now I'm in a lot of closed. And it's intense because there is a distinct sense of being disconnected from what makes me the predator. If you ever play a video game that shove you in an underwater level, no one likes those because you're not supposed to, because you almost always fight a thing that's supposed to be there, like a shark or a merman. Well, that's their natural habitat and it's not yours. So they're probably more effective than you are. They move better, they fight better. They probably, maybe, like it's in Coder, I think it's Knights of the Republic 1, you're in like a bubble suit. If you take damage, you just die. The idea is that you ran out of air immediately and you just dead. And you kind of, like you're walking on the moon, only you don't have the fancy gravity option, so you're just kind of, you're a sitting duck. Here you are, this all-powerful Jedi Master. I can fry like 80 guys from 100 yards. I can throw the lightsaber 50 feet. I can do a flying leap that clears a building. And here underwater, I am absolutely the prey. And I'll keep doing this, panning the camera around in circles, because there's something in here that can kill me, and I just know it. And I know it because NPCs told me that there's predator creatures out there, sharks and that sort of thing. And it's kind of hard to be mad at them when they tear you in half, because look at you, you're like a chicken nugget. Like you're free lunch. They're just doing what they do.
That's exactly what they were supposed to do. For them, that's not even an encounter. They didn't roll dice.
So you did tell them you did tell them. If I was a tabletop experience, what my GM would have done was tell me that there was a threat out there, and maybe even tell me what it is. There are sharks. What he did not say was, if you go in the water, you will die. He didn't say that. He said, there are sharks. And then I get to, the difference there is that second one, if you go in the water, you will die, is a declarative statement that tells me what my expectations are. They tell me that I will not go in the water and survive. There are sharks. Lets me have thoughts like, he wouldn't fuck us, or I can take a shark, or things like that. Once you say the difference between if you go in the water, you'll die, and there are sharks in the water. This one, you hand them the ball of expectation, and you let their brain do all the work. And I promise you will have at least one player who is just chomping at the bit to get in the water and kick that shark's ass. And then when the shark shreds him to pieces, his fault. He had all the agency.
True. And again, as far as going along with the game and making it engaging, for sure that's the way to go. But here's the thing. That is going to immediately break all the kind of thematically horror elements to it. The moment Jaws comes out of the water, it becomes a fight, and you're done with the horror.
You're absolutely right, because you've gone from unknown to known.
So that's what I mean is, and what do you put on that left turn that they took that is still going to reward them in the sense that don't stop exploring, but I can't resolve it for you, because if I resolve something for you, then the last hour of building up the tension and ratcheting up, I spent it. I released it on this.
Right. I got distracted there for a second, but the reason I brought that dying light part up is because at this point in the game, I've skulked through, giant piles of bodies, giant slicks of blood, zombies that appear out of nowhere and explode, zombies that hit you with bile from 50 feet away, that hurts like crazy and blurs your vision. The night bit, which is terrifying. Like, there's a bunch of stuff in Dying Light that is revolting. It's uncomfortable. It's genuinely scary. Nighttime is, 100 zombies in daylight, no big deal. 8 minutes. The night cycle on the difficulty I'm playing on is 8 real world minutes. That's it. And a day is something like 45 minutes. Don't care. 8 minutes is too long. It's scary as crap. It's scary as crap. And so I've done all kinds of things. I'm in the school. You find a torso. Maybe it was a person. Maybe it was a walker. Don't know. Doesn't have any limbs or a head. It's kind of hard to tell. A bloody torso. That happens a lot. Usually when I beat Rice's Men, they look like that when I'm done with them. So it's kind of hard to tell if that was a person or a walker. It has a lead pipe stuck through it and suspended on the wall. You absolutely have my attention. You absolutely have my attention. I don't know what that is. I don't know who did that, but I didn't. So something that can wield a weapon effectively is in here. Guns don't take off limbs like that. Not in Dying Light, they don't. So that has my attention. Also, if I needed a weapon, I can take that out of the wall. Gross.
but still an option.
So if you do that, if you give your players a beacon of fear, something that let them believe they know more about the monster, and they actually might put a big glowing footprint on the ground, somebody's head just hanging on a post. I don't know, a bunch of human hands in a pile. Nothing else, just the hands.
Did you happen to watch through all of the seasons of Game of Thrones?
No, I have yet to see an episode of Game of Thrones.
Oh, okay. Because
I know, weird, right?
No, that's fine. And again, I can't judge you for the media you consume. I consume different ones. That's fine. But there is a scene in one of the later seasons that, again, most people didn't get to because
I understand it got weird after a while.
Here's the thing. Also unpopular. I found it perfectly enjoyable. It was fine for me. But
okay.
Anyway, not the point. There's a scene in which they come up to a wall that has hands stuck to the wall in a particular pattern that has been displayed several times in the show before. That is, it goes unexplained. They never had told you what that pattern meant, but this is the first time these characters found it, and they were like, "This is not random. This is a pattern of hands on the wall, like severed hands on the wall, or limbs, or whatever it was." And there is something to be feared here. And that is exactly, and then they just turn back and they go back the other way they were coming. Like, yep, left turn was not correct. We're going right now because we do not want to find out what this was. And, and they never explain it. They absolutely, the show ends, all the seasons end. You never know what the hell that was. But it doesn't matter.
When was the last time you watched an episode of Game of Thrones? When was the last time you watched an episode of Game of Thrones?
Probably a year ago.
and you're still chewing on that. Think about what that means.
Correct. Absolutely right. So I guess that would be I guess that would be the answer to, well, what do you give them when they went the wrong way? You give them or something to further the flavor, something to either further the story. You give them a plot coupon, or you can give them a what are we gonna call it? Flavor coupon, maybe.
The flavor coupon, yeah.
Yeah. So something of the sort. Now, either way, there has to be, as you said, some sort of reason why it's okay to go take the wrong decision or go down the wrong path that didn't resolve it, because otherwise, then you're just railroading them,
right?
De facto, it maybe not really, but you're just de facto like, hey, either choose the way that I think is right, or you're gonna find nothing.
Right, or the other end, I'll just move what is right to where you are. There's an art to that. If the thing you wanted them to see was a fight with an ogre, and you move the ogre no matter where they go, I'm not a huge fan of that. It not because I arbitrarily think it's unacceptable. I think it's totally acceptable if your players know that. Like I have a player on my, what day is today? Saturday, Friday table, who runs his job is to be creative and to really peer into people's brains. He's a social worker and he gives everything he has to the job. So on Friday's his day off. He does not want to make a bunch of creative choices. He really doesn't. He does them anyway because he can't help it because he's a natural creative, but he doesn't want me to ask him to work for it. He wants me to grab him by the nose and drag him through a plot. So in his case, absolutely Quantum Ogre, absolutely. Because he's not going to make a bunch of decisions anyway, and he told me, we talked about it, that's what he wants. Don't assume your players want free will. They might not. Ask them.
For sure. Now, also, in part of the buy-in that we were talking about is that maybe in the pitch of this, like, hey, we're going to do a horror-themed situation.
Right.
That would be part of the pitch. Like, hey, well, for horror to work, guys, I'm going to have to curate this experience for you. It might feel, I mean, how good are we with feeling a little bit more railroady, but kind of going along for it?
Right.
So yeah, so I guess it's might not be the session zero for the campaign, but it might merit still, if nothing else, a check-in with your players before you actually deploy the horror-themed session or the horror-themed even adventure.
That and what I like to call a demo table, like a demo disc from a video game. You play a level. A demo table can be anything from, you'd like to cross a bridge, this bandit disagrees with how much that costs, right? I am forcing a combat counter upon you, a nice boring one. So basically, usually this is a tutorial. For a new player, they don't know how combat works. Well, I want them to feel comfortable with how combat works before they're fighting something that can absolutely kill them. So we do like a mock-up. And then we do the same thing with a social interaction. You really, really want that armor. The guy tells you it costs 400 gold. You have 300 gold. Go. Like an improv scene. You describe a situation where you restrict choice. It's in a box. You don't see a keyhole, right? You can't steal it. You can't beat him up and take it. Like they know this. Like you're not restricting their access in a real experience. You're saying, hey, if you had to talk your way through it, how would you do that? And if your players say, I wouldn't, I would let Jim Bob do it, and I would sit there and get all pissed off. Okay, you needed to know that. Now the next question is that the player or is that the character? The player doesn't like social interaction, and you have 6 of those, and you have 6 players, you don't have social interactions because they just don't want it. Because lots of players, when you ask them what they want, what genre they're looking for, what their expectations are, a lot of players, both old ones, like ones who've been playing for a long time, and new ones, their eyes go dead because they've never actually been asked that before, and it's a big question with a small specific answer, and they don't really know how to do that. Introspection is hard. So instead, ask them specific questions in specific situations, as opposed to saying, what do you do to get around a guard? Well, that's a big vacuum question. How big is he? How many are there? What is he guarding? Are we on a planet with normal gravity? Do I have magic powers? Like, you can ask so many questions about that. Sure. If you say, You're Luke Skywalker from episode 3. You're in a cage. The guard outside has the key, but he's 50 feet away and the only, like, you're in a closed space. You're in the cage. He's in the guard space outside the cage. The only thing between you and freedom is him, the bars, and the door on the other side of the table he's sitting at. What do you do? Assuming they know who Luke Skywalker is from that movie, you've eliminated a great deal of the questions they might ask. And now you pay attention, and they'll tell you what kind of player they are in a situation where they're in a cage.
True, absolutely so. And so I guess then horror might not be the opening adventure for a new table.
Oh, probably not. I'm not sure that's a good idea.
And which is kind of also the point, because especially if you're a game master that wants to be paid to do these things, if you get hired like, hey, we want to run a horror game,
right?
It's very different as I want to run a horror themed module like Curse of Strahd in Dungeons and Dragons, which you can still run as just an adventure. And so like, oh,
it doesn't have to be all horror, right?
Or is that we want a horror experience with this game mechanic that we bought, which is Dungeons and Dragons, or whatever it is.
So go ahead. I'm sorry.
Yeah, because that distinction needs to be made.
Oh yeah, I had this comes up constantly, which is how come I came up with the idea of the demo table. I say things like get to know your players, which to be fair is easy to say, much easier to say than it is to do. And somebody called me on that, and they were like, "It's easy to say," and I went, "Yeah, I suppose that's fair." And they went, if you've been playing, like my friends Batman and Tom, we've been playing together for years at this point, and I know what to expect from either one of them in almost any situation. There's Batman does not dream sequences, period. He intrinsically hates them. Do not do one, not okay. Tom only wants like 3 things to pick from. If I give him any more than that, he is paralyzed with indecision and locks up into like the fetal position in his brain. And now Batman is doing all of the work, and that's not fair either. And I only know that because I played with them for a long time and patterns emerged. But in order for you to find the pattern, you need time. If you're a professional GM and you're playing with people you've never played before, you don't have that time. You just don't. In theory, you won't have patterns by the time the 5-hour one-shot is over because you just don't have enough screen time with them. And somebody called me on it, and they were right. So demo table, come up with and do a micro campaign if you want, and be upfront about that. Say, hey, look, session 0, right? We're going to talk about mechanics and house rules and what system you guys want and character classes. And does anyone want to play a kobold who believes this piece of soggy cardboard is their god reborn, right? I haven't had that yet in one of these days. There's whatever ridiculous concept you have come up with. If we want to know what your collective vision is, so that if there's a system that matches that, well, great, use that one. If there isn't, system has to get out of the way then. Like, we'll need to make modifications for we'll need to build the framework for which your vision will take place.
Right.
Then you have, but you still don't charge for that, right? Then have a demo table that you also don't charge for. The demo table is part tutorial. This is how this system works. But it's also tutorial for each other. Well, if saying I'm going to start a band, if starting a band was that easy, every teenage boy ever would be in a band. But they're not, because it's not as easy as going to the grocery, going to the laundromat, pulling the ticket off the wall and going, need a drummer? Call this number. Boom, done. You meet that drummer. Okay, maybe he's terrible. Maybe he's great. He's just not the sound you want. Not everyone is intrinsically compatible. They're just not, and that's nobody's fault.
Yeah, maybe he sounds great, but you just hate that guy. Yeah.
Right. He's a guitarist and he plays country music, and your ears go, ooh, dude, no, ow. Right. You're great for the guy in the cowboy hat. I don't know, Van Halen. Not my thing.
Yeah, we need the top hat and the electric guitar.
Right. So you have the demo table so that people can get tutorial grips with each other and see how they mesh together as a team. You don't charge for that either. And then if you want to do a micro campaign, if you don't think you have enough data left, do that and say, hey, look, we're going to play for exactly 3 sessions. That's it, for 4 hours each. At the end of that 12th hour, you don't roll out of it. You stop. You go, and that's it. We're done. If you want to be, flexible and generous and having a great time, feel free to finish whatever they're doing, but do not schedule a 4th session. Stop. And then say, hey guys, that was a lot of fun. What did you think? If you want to call it fancy, something fancy, so they don't think it's, I don't know, therapy or something. A lot of people I've met, mostly guys, when I ask them for feedback, don't answer me, or I get something vague like I had fun. Well, gee, thanks. That's nice, but it doesn't actually help. It's not constructive. Like, and then they feel like you slapped them because they gave you a compliment and you criticize them. So that's ugly. Avoid that. Instead, ask them specific questions. When were you the most bored? When did you have the most fun? Did any part of that throw you off in a good way? Ask the same question. Did any part of that make you uncomfortable, as in a bad way, right? Be specific with your questions. And then let, like, say, hey, if you guys want to schedule something sometime, great. Leave it. Tomorrow, double check with them. Leave it. They'll double check with them tomorrow and then go from there. And that's a lot of time that you've just spent that you didn't get paid for. But we used to be able to buy demo discs where you get 14 PS1 levels on one. They don't make those anymore.
No, absolutely true.
So a lot of the time, like as a player, I am uncomfortable spending money on a host I haven't already seen.
Now here's the thing that you might want to chew on and let everyone else have their own kind of thoughts about this one. The reason that the demo disc was so functional for the company that made the video game is because they had to produce the demo disc, but then they can make as many copies of it at minimal additional charge. Whereas for you, every demo table is a new production.
Right. So you have the demo table be a one shot. It's 4 hours, it's 5 hours, it's 3 hours. It's my Friday table is 2 hours. That's it.
And this is something I'm spitballing. I did not plan to propose this one, but how would you feel about getting together with a bunch of your friends, people you've played with before, preferably, and recording a session and saying like, hey, if you want to play with me, this is what it's like. This is what I bring. This is stuff, and it's a little bit like a commercial, I guess.
Right. So like a highlight reel. If you're gonna approach Steven Spielberg and say, hey, I want a job, let's assume for a second that it's really that easy and he's at the bus station. You can just walk up to him. Sure. Be like, hey, Steven, big fan of your work. Of course I am. You're one of the greatest movie producers ever. I want a job. I have such and such education. Here's why you should hire me. Assuming he actually listens to you, I assume that Steven Spielberg is an incredibly busy and picky man. I assume. Not that he's a bad man, just a fussy one.
No, but his time is most definitely at a premium.
Right. Let's assume for a second he actually hears you out on that. I assume that one of his questions is going to be, let me see your work. Well, I hope you brought some, because if you have to go home and get it now, you look bad. This is using a resume to a job. If it's a resume in which you are making, if it's a job in which you are making content, not working at Home Depot,
right?
Then you should provide some sort of visual reel. If you put in for a job as an animator, they're going to want to see some of your work. It's the same thing. So I don't think it's a commercial at all. I think it's a highlight reel. My only issue there is that's a highlight reel with Batman, Tom, and I. When you said friends you play with forever, my first thought was to make a recording of Batman, Tom, and I, maybe just the three of us, because their energy is totally enough.
No, the reason why I said friends you've played with before, it's because there's going to be less pauses for rules. It's going to be more like roll it and people will know what role it means, or people will understand how do you want to do this, or that sort of thing.
If the reason that I'm not sure I think on the one hand that sounds like a great idea. I'm not sure it actually is a great idea, because if then Jim Bob and Jack John, I like the name Jack John. I just made it up. Let's go with that. Jim Bob and Jack John call me and they're like, hey, we loved it. We saw it. It was great. We want to hire you. Fantastic. What system are you guys playing? We're playing Five Torches Deep. Great. That looks like fun. Let's do that. And it's not that, because there's going to be a bunch of in-jokes and old energy that Tom, Batman, and I have that I don't have with those two guys. It's not really going to be the same.
Then that might be just a matter of editing it properly so that you don't, and that might be a little bit more production. But just like the demo discs that the company's made, there's a lot of production that goes into that.
Right.
But once you have it, spread it out.
Right.
So yeah, that might be an investment. Instead of spending the hours it would take you to do 4 demo tables,
Mhm.
you do 1 demo table, and then the rest of that time in editing, post production, or getting someone to do that, or whatever it was going to cost you. It might be, and again, I'm throwing this out there, by the way. It might be a better investment
It
as
might.
a paid GM to put that extra work that's going to be a lot more than just a demo table, but in once, maybe twice every 2 years, and then have that be the thing that you say, like, hey, take a look. And especially now in the digital age, in which
Oh yeah.
people are not going to get together most of the time, that might be an avenue.
It was.
And
I mean, this is live on YouTube right now, right? And it was that easy. I opened Zoom, I hit link to YouTube, we're done. That was it. If
true.
if Tom and Batman and I were going to play just like this, it would also be that easy. Particularly if we put it in the same room. This room is not particularly large. Batman could sit there. Tom could sit in the chair right next to me that you can see the arm of. Actually, on Sundays when Tom plays with us, he comes over here because his internet is terrible and he hates repeating himself. So he sits right there. So
I empathize. I empathize with that. I've been having those draws.
If we played right here, then we got a fold out table. I put it in the middle of the room for them to roll dice because Tom likes to roll dice. I roll dice right here next to my speaker. We're done. That's it.
You've seen my big bag of dice, right? I understand the urge, but either way.
So I have a little tray here with 2 sets of dice that are never ever any farther than arm's reach from my computer because I host 6 tables a week. And
I'm gonna turn this out so you can actually see. This is I work here. This is my
your job, right?
That's the and if you just turn around,
wow,
all the stuff is there, and the first thing you'll see is big bag of dice.
The sack of dice, right? I have a sack of dice, but it's mostly empty because I always give my dice away. And D4s grow little legs and wander off, and I don't know what's going on with that.
Oh, D4s are like whenever I explain to them, like, what are pitons? Well, pitons are little spikes that you can use to climb walls, and because you're explaining what the stuff is.
Right.
And what are these caltrops? I literally once I just dropped a couple of D4s onto the ground. Try stepping over that.
Oh, right. That's good. I like that. What are caltrops?
That's caltrops. That's what they are.
Last time I had a fistful of jacks, like from when I was a kid, and throw them on the ground.
Yep, that works.
They were metal
and
everything. They basically were caltrops, right?
Yeah.
But not everybody has jacks, you know. But if you have D&D, it's a great video we should do sometime. So if you have so many tools in front of you all the time, even if you have like 0 prep, if you have no minis and no board and no prep and no monster manual and nothing like that, if you just have 7 dice and you're a person, you're already prepared, more than prepared, to run a copious amount of characters from D&D or any other tabletop system. Want to know what somebody's? It's stuff. A lot of people do this thing where they look at the table and then they go, well, I wonder what this guy would look like or that guy would look like. Like the other day, I asked somebody what their character was before they were a superhero, and they went like this. Why? Everybody was a superhero before. Everybody was a person before they were something else. You were, in theory, an NPC before you were a PC. That's how come PCs are level 1 and NPCs are level 0. You were something before you were a fighter, and chances are that something was unbearable enough for you to risk the dangerous life of being an adventurer, or you wouldn't have done it. You would have done the other thing instead. What was so damn bad that you quit?
Now you actually risk your life, and that's worthwhile.
Right. Are you a farmer and just plague wiped out your family, and your farmland, and that life is just over? I can starve to death slowly, or I can go pick goblins' noses with a sword. Right. Like, even if I kill just 1 goblin, that's enough meat for a week.
Actually, backstory might be the best way to get into horror. Because,
probably.
Yeah.
I think that's
what horror story drove you to become an adventurer.
Right. I think that's a super important detail. So if your characters, if you throw your characters into a grimdark or horror, they're not the same thing. But if you throw them into either situation, they do have one thing in common. Both of them are really intense and life-threatening, more so than your average adventuring campaign. Why then would you risk it? Just for the fun of it? It's actually not fun. Most people, when they experience actual grimdark, it's not fun. Geralt does not have a good time as a Witcher. His life is terrible. He never has any money. He has very few friends and he almost never gets to see them. His life is constantly in danger, and he only lives because of long, rigorous study that was exceedingly boring. You have a lot of fun playing Geralt. Geralt's life is kind of shit.
There's
Parker,
actually there's an episode of Supernatural in
yeah.
which the two characters, Dean and
Oh, I was forget his name.
Sam and Dean,
Yeah,
they
right.
actually come into what is our universe,
Mhm.
and Supernatural is a TV show. And it's like, why would anyone want to watch this? It's horrible. We're always drunk. We're always sleeping in cheap motels. This is not glamorous. Why would people watch this? And it's something that they, as characters, say like, this is a terrible lifestyle. Why would someone?
Right.
Yeah, it's
Spider-Man
exactly.
has really cool powers up front, and they're fairly unique. Web swinging is pretty much limited to him and his spider-based friends, and Venom because he cheats. Uh, but but Spider-Man has incredible strength. He can bench press 12 tons. That's incredible. That's amazing. Yeah, amazing. Yeah, fun. Anyway, that was an accident. Sorry about that. I can't be held responsible. It just happened. He has an amazing and incredible life. But Spider-Man isn't Spider-Man. He's really Peter Parker. And Peter Parker's life kind of sucks. He doesn't have any money. He never gets to see his friends. He's always lying to them. He's always running off. His No wonder he can't like hold down a stable romance. What person wants to spend time with that? Like that's not fair at all.
Worst boyfriend ever, for
Worst
sure.
boyfriend ever. So if you're players, why then does Spider-Man go do all these incredibly dangerous things? Wouldn't it be easier to just Mary Jane likes him? They got married for a while. Why doesn't he just do that? Why
Well,
doesn't he?
literally because the devil. But that's not.
Yeah. But before that, the Spider-Man in the '90s, they got married there too. Back when he had a mullet.
Sure.
How come?
As usual, I hate to be the downer and I have to come this close as we're getting close to that 2 hour mark, which is what the attention span for most people is. Not only that is also the time we have allocated for this stuff. But before we do go, thank you. This has been enlightening beyond words, because I've actually never, like we said when we were discussing doing this, I've never run a horror campaign.
Oh, good.
So
here's
this is good. Definitely good stuff. Things that people might want to keep in mind before they run their first horror campaign. Buy-in is the most important thing you have. If your players do not want a horror campaign, do not force it upon them, because they will.
Don't have a shot.
There's no way it's going to be successful, and no one's going to have fun with it, regardless of if you're being paid for it or not. Simply do not impose something that is so out of the norm that it could just break everyone's engagement for it, or just fun. Just say like, you know what, this is not what I signed up for. We're not hiring you again. Or you know what, well, let's ditch this campaign, do something else, because that's not what we're going for. On the other hand, once you have sufficient buy-in, you can pretty much go nuts with it, it seems, because you put in as much as you want to make it as creepy as you want. And last but not least, the most important thing that I found, if you already have the buy-in and you're going to do this, is pacing. Make sure that you do not break the pacing, and don't allow the players to get themselves into a situation which you do not know how to still pace. That doesn't mean that there's no fight. You can role play the fight. That doesn't mean they didn't turn to the room that wasn't there. Just have something that will increase either the dread, or it will increase the information about whatever it is that they're facing in such a way that it will still be scary. But do not, railroading does not mean good pacing. Railroading just means loss of player agency. So still find a way.
Which is not necessarily, and I have to say this again, is not necessarily bad. There seems to be this assumption that the sandbox is good and the railroad is bad.
Nope, it is absolutely not bad. Just make sure, and like anything else, make sure that everyone is on board for that. If I want to play through a movie and I'm okay with that, perfect. If I want to play through an adventure that's still horror, that's fine too. Just make sure that you know what you're putting out there, and make sure that that is exactly what the players want to be set forth in. With that in mind, any closing remarks or recommendations for either viewing, watching, and reading otherwise that might help with the whole horror theme? Catch mid-bite. Sorry there.
That's okay. I'm a huge fan of Guy Scanlers over on How to Be a Great GM. Now, because I have rampant ADHD, I recently, and I can't believe I didn't know this already. Apparently, there's a button you can push on YouTube videos that speeds them up. And Guy talks
okay.
very deliberately, and I don't mean slowly. I mean he deliberately speaks so that you have time to absorb what he said. We're not talking Ben Stein, but he does talk with a deliberate pace that is too slow for me. Not his fault. I'm not the common denominator, and I know it. So I check the little box. I usually turn Guy up to time and a half, maybe 2 times, depending on how excited he is. But anyway, Guy's videos are fantastic, and he has a couple on horror and pacing. He has the single greatest video on pacing I have ever seen. It is brilliant. Watch that. I'll see if I can't find a link to that specific video. Guy's videos, if there's one big complaint, they're not particularly well organized, and there are hundreds of them, like 400 of them.
So look through the catalog.
Oh, watch them all. They're great. Yeah, but he's got one on pacing that's fantastic. And each of his videos range from 8 to 45 minutes. So to watch them all that's binge watching now. Now you're talking a TV show. That's a lot of work. But
which still is something we can do. We can manage.
And so yeah, buy-in is incredibly important. It's paramount. It's not just important. You need it. Don't play without it. If your players have given you the buy-in, then it's particularly to a horror table, they're saying, give us everything you got. Like,
right. Go all out.
Don't worry about it. If I would go for Monte Cook has a great sheet of paper, a questionnaire that says, here are things that I'm okay with, go nuts. Here are things that I'm okay with, but make it fast and maybe not focus in on it. And here are things that I just don't want to hear about, not even off camera, just no. And that sounds like social justice or woke or whatever you want to call it. Do it. It's important. If your players rub their nose at it, okay. Don't push, say okay. And if your players, but you're going to have a player out there somewhere with a trauma. And when you step on it, that's not scary. That's not okay. And they're going to get.
That's right. It was a different thing. We're doing horror and scaring for entertainment, not for actual,
Right. Even if they don't get upset, like even if they don't say something, they would have liked that better if that didn't happen.
For sure.
So even if they're
for sure.
Right. So
sure.
That sheet is free. I'll find it, use it. I'm not getting paid or anything, even though I'm a big fan of Monte Cook, but that sheet of paper is brilliant. And I find a lot of people that go, well, that's dumb. I don't play D&D that have to deal with real world issues. You do though, because all the people at the table are real people in the real world.
That's right. And they will bring up whatever it is that their actual backstory is as a person.
Right. Whether they want to or not, at a certain point, it'll leak in. Right.
For sure.
And this is true even in professional actors, like Jack Nicholson actors are hired over time because patterns develop. That's how you know one actor is good at one thing and not good at another thing. This is how come typecast happens, and how come people like The Rock go out of their way to not be typecast. He tries really hard. He's done all kinds of ridiculous things. Anyway, so right. Get permission, right? Get permission to do whatever it is you want to do, not just with horror, but with everything. Have the permission, and then get the buy-in. They're not the same thing. Because somebody said, I'm up for it, does not mean, like you said earlier, with the
I'm up for horror does not mean I'm up for anything.
Right. I'm going to indulge my GM because I likes it. It's not the same thing as I wants it. And you want the second one.
All right. Well, with that in mind, thank you for your time. I know that it's mostly my schedule forcing you to get up early in the mornings.
That's
just the way that things operate, and that I actually have to now go and do work stuff. So it is what it is.
But the commute is really short, I understand. And that's good.
The commute is actually just, I am going to make a quick stop, get some coffee. That's just going up a flight of stairs and coming back. But other than that,
coffee in the house then.
Oh yeah, no, for sure.
Okay, I'm good. Wow, that is wicked fast. Have a great day.
All right. Thank you for your time, guys. Have a good one.